Hi. Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to FLAD. My name is Rita Faden, I'm FLAD's president, and it's with a great pleasure that we are here again for another Meet the Author session, this time with Joshua Cohen, that wrote a wonderful book called The Netanyahus, which I see lots of people here with the book already. And so I would like to thank Isabel Lucas, which will be conducting the conversation today, and which is the one that organizes these sessions with us. She's responsible for conducting not only the conversations, but also for choosing the authors and for curating this program, as we like to think. So thank you for Isabel for your work with us. Thank you also to Leia for the publishing house from Joshua for working with us for this collaboration. And thank you all for being here. And now, without further ado, I will pass the floor to you because I'm very much interested in hearing your conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for being here. After 2 years of trying to have you here, here we are.
I didn't know I was playing hard to get. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was? Oh, wow.
Okay. Yes. It was an effort, a really effort, but here you are. And first of all, I would like to ask Joshua to read a part of his book, The Netanyahus, in Portuguese translated as Família Netanyahu. His translator is here, Francisco Garis. He made a great job. But Joshua, if you please.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me here. I'll just read a very brief little section here from the beginning of the book. My name is Ruben Blum, and I'm an historian. Soon enough, though, I guess I'll be historical, by which I mean I'll die and become history myself in a rare type of transformation traditionally reserved for the purer scholars. Lawyers die and don't become the law. Doctors die and don't turn into medicine. But biology and chemistry professors pass away and decompose into biology and chemistry. They mineralize into geology. They disperse into their science just as surely as mathematicians become statistics. The same process holds true for us historians. In my experience, we're the only ones in the humanities for whom this holds true, the only ones who become what we study. We age, we yellow, we go wrinkled and brittle along with our materials until our lives subside into the past to become the very substance of time. Or maybe that's just the Jew in me talking. Goyim believe in the word becoming flesh, but Jews believe in the flesh becoming word, a more natural, rational incarnation. By way of further introduction, I will now quote a remark made to me by the who shall remain nameless then president of the American Historical Association when I met him at a symposium back in my student days just after the Second World War. "Ah," he said, limply pressing my hand. "Blum, did you say? A Jewish historian?" Though the man surely intended this remark to wound me, it merely succeeded in bringing delight, and even now I find I can smile at the description. I appreciate its accidental imprecision in the way the double entendre can function as a type of psychological test. A Jewish historian, when you hear that, what do you think? What image springs to mind? The point is, the epithet as applied is both correct and incorrect. I am a Jewish historian, but I am not an historian of the Jews, or I've never been one professionally.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Just a brief presentation for those who doesn't know yet. Joshua Cohen is from Atlantic City, one of America's gambling capitals.
Used to be.
Used to be.
Yeah.
And now?
Now it's just a gamble.
Okay. Go on. And is if the coastal city in the state of New Jersey had injected him with the right dose, if there is such a thing, of narrative delirium and maladjustment to the rules more or less devoted, followed by the generation of writers to which he belongs. University education, English departments, or comparative literature studies, creative writing. Cohen turned his back on all this and had pursued a solitary, singular path so vibrant that several critics have considered him a genius or a stylistic prodigy, as James would call him. What do you think about this?
I think it's one of the better sentences that James Wood has written. I don't know. I thank you. I mean, it's all bullshit, but thank you.
I'll continue? May
No.
I? Okay. So
No.
let's talk about the Netanyahus.
I mean, unless you want to just sit here and read things to me, but I'm here. We can, we can do this.
So let's talk about the book. Let's
Okay.
talk about your work. The Netanyahus starts with a relation that you had with another critic, Harold Bloom. Just can you tell us how that book started, the genesis of the Netanyahus?
It started that a friend of mine, a great sort of translator from medieval Hebrew, and especially medieval Hebrew poetry written in Iberia and Spain and Portugal, a guy named Peter Cole, who was neighbors with Harold Bloom, gave Harold a book of mine. And Harold Bloom...
The Numbers?
A book of Numbers, yeah. And Harold wrote an essay about Book of Numbers and then published it. And it was published in some weird academic journal at like 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. And at 4:30 p.m. on that Wednesday, so an hour and a half later, I get a call and it says, "This is Harold Bloom. I just published an essay about you. I have a favor I need to ask you." Right. So while he's talking to me, I'm looking up this essay that he had emailed me, trying to read the essay while he's asking me a favor. And the favor was that he wanted someone who wasn't from Yale, university taught at for so long, to sort of sit with him and listen to him while he put together a memoir. He ended up writing a memoir about his sort of life in poetry, which was published, Take Arm Against the Sea of Struggles, but which came out. But he wanted to write a memoir about his life, and insofar as he had one outside of books, and so I went up and sat with him, and he was pretty ill at this point. I mean, his brain was together, but his body was sort of falling apart. And he sort of would tell me anecdotes. You know, some of them are in the end of the book, you know, hanging out with Derrida, hanging out with Gershom Scholem, stories about Nabokov. And who knew what was true and what wasn't with him? And then in the middle of one of the conversations, CNN is on in the background. You know, he's from that early TV generation, that first TV generation that just always kept TV on the background like wallpaper. I think they thought that if they turned it off, they could never turn it back on again. And suddenly, you know, Bibi Netanyahu is up on TV. And he says, "Oh, you know, I met that guy." And I'm thinking, okay, when did you meet him? Maybe, you know, in the 90s when he was UN ambassador or something. He's like, "No, I think he was like 10 years old. And I really met his father when his father was sent out. I was the only Jewish faculty member at the time, and they told me to take him around, you know, on a tour during a week where he was doing an interview." I said, "What do you remember about it?" And he said, "He was an asshole." Okay. Jean Bloom, his wife, comes in the room, and he's like, "Oh, he wasn't that bad." And then they start arguing about whether Benzion Netanyahu was an asshole, who was worse, him or his wife, and blah, blah, blah. And then they're talking about something that happened 60 years in the past. And that was it. That was the entire anecdote. And he went on, and work on that memoir was interrupted by the greatest interruption, Harold dying. And when I was asked to put something together for his memorial service, I listened to the recordings, and that anecdote jumped out at me. And I pursued it from there.
And the part of the hassle, you were just the part of the hassle.
Which part of the asshole?
Got it. I lost myself. But let's start to the part that you read here.
Mm-hmm.
It's the beginning of the book. The narrator as a kind of I don't know. He has the name Bloom, writing in another way. Ruben Bloom is the voice of the book. How did you get to this character, Ruben Bloom? It's a part biography, part fictional, based on Harold Bloom.
No, I mean, I think it's the anti-Bloom.
The anti-Bloom.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything Harold Bloom wasn't. I mean, Harold Bloom was he was proudly Jewish, proud of the fact that he was born in the Bronx. His first language was Yiddish. He then became a Shakespeare scholar, an expert in English Romantic poetry, a major crazy literary scholar, interested in psychoanalysis, in Gnosticism. And my Ruben Blum is a guy who wants to forget that he's Jewish, who's a failed accountant, who becomes a professor of taxation studies. So it's sort of the opposite of Bloom. I was thinking a lot about parodying almost every aspect of not just Harold as a person, but parodying in a mirrored way also Harold's ideas. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember reading the Anxiety of Influence, you know, which is, Harold is one of the literary critics who's kind of most famous for his best idea, which is not always the case for literary critics. But I remember reading that and essentially saying to Harold, you know, it's sort of like you're talking about taxation. You know, when he talks about influence, it's what is owed and whether or not you can feel yourself as part of a collective or whether you feel yourself as an independent, an individual who owes nothing to a collective. And so I kind of satirized kind of Bloom's ideas of influence in the idea of taxation studies.
Mm-hmm. And how was your relation with Bloom, Harold Bloom? He was a kind of master of critic or something like that.
I don't know about that. No, I mean, look, I was toward the end of his life. I have many friends who are much closer to him than I was. People who were students of his, people who wrote books with him, for him. He was sweet and terrifying simultaneously. I always thought that I was going to kill him, accidentally kill him, because he would dictate to me lists of food for me to buy for him in New York and bring to him that he wasn't allowed to eat.
Okay.
And so I would have to buy him like all of this very salty white fish he wasn't supposed to eat. I'd have to get him brownies and cookies and all this shit, and I'd have to kind of slip it to him.
So you were a kind of a dealer.
I was a dealer, yeah. I was a dealer. So I had a typical kind of dealer-client relationship, yeah.
Okay. Here, when we are talking about the history and Jewish history, and you explore in this book the action of the book passes almost in a university campus, and I would like you to explain this. That is, I guess, one of the main subjects in the book. That is the relation between history and religion. What interests you in this connection, or to explore this?
Well, I think one of the interests in this was actually about exploring two different conceptions of history. One could be seen as a more religious interpretation of history, which is to say, you know, they could be very crudely put into the category of Enlightenment history versus medieval history. And of course, Ben-Zion Netanyahu was an expert in medieval history. Medieval history being this idea that history is patternized and that it's cyclical, that it repeats, that certain patterns and certain ideas are timeless, and that certain nations and races have certain traits, and that given a certain amount of time, these same patterns recur and repeat. whether that is a certain tradition of tragedy, let's say, in a Judaic interpretation of history, in a Judeo-pessimistic interpretation of history, whether it's ideas of rise and fall of empires, but it's a belief in patternization. Whereas you have the Enlightenment history, which is referred to usually as a meliorist history, which means that history is progressive. We might not be great now, but we are better than the generation before us. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. We are constantly improving. We are not perfect, but possibly we are perfectible. And so this idea of circular history, meaning repetitive history, and linear history, that is constantly improving or improvable, seems to me to be fundamentally underlying a lot of political discussions and political dialectics within our time. And it's very interesting, I think, to be a medieval historian. I mean, of course, that's said from someone from the outside. I'm sure if I actually took on medieval history, I would kill myself. But you know, this essence of medieval history, where there's a fatalistic element, where it's almost a prescriptive element. It's not a descriptive history, it's a prescriptive history where you might be at this point in history, but this is where empires end up. This is where, this is how this nation will tend. This, to my mind, was, it's deeply fatalistic, and Benzion Netanyahu's way out of it was not messianistic, but it was statist. It was the autonomy of the Jewish people that one could break out of this cyclical history.
Mm-hmm. And the book, the action of the book, it's in 2011, 1959 and
1960. Yeah.
Netanyahu was 10 years, 9 years. Bibi.
Bibi was 10 years old then. Yeah.
Can you tell me the relation or the story behind this name Bibi? Because when we think about Bibi here in Portugal or in Europe, we don't think in the same way that Jewish think Bibi.
You think it's like a baby name?
Baby.
Yeah. It sounds what, like not serious or something?
It's childish.
Childish. Well,
Bibi.
It's fitting. Yeah. I think that so much of Netanyahu's disastrous and malfeasant career is about being perceived in multiple ways by different constituencies. It's interesting that he, as a kind of an arch Ashkenaz, Western European Jew, is seen by Mizrahim, by Jews from the Arab world, as almost one of them in his political stances. And they don't see that he's from this sort of Ashkenaz elite that they resent. It's interesting that this person who is a secular, lobster-eating person who does not observe Sabbath, whatever, is beloved by the Orthodox, right? Who don't love anyone. He has this phenomenal ability to present different selves to different constituencies. A lot of that, I think, began with his nickname, frankly. To have the name Binyamin, which I'm already pronouncing with too much of an Ashkenaz pronunciation, Binyamin would be in the Hebrew, it's a biblical, old-fashioned Israeli name, almost of an older generation. And it would project to Israelis something of the past. It's not a new Israeli name. And to take on a nickname like Bibi is immediately to say, no, I'm not of that strain. I'm closer to the earth. I'm closer to the people.
Okay.
I'm not from this literary, religious realm. I'm just like you.
Okay. The book has parts that sounds like essays, and there are another parts that are hilarious dialogues. How did you balance this kind of different ways of making a novel that is a satire of not only the academic world, the literary world, but of our world, I guess.
Yeah, I don't really see them as different genres. I just think that it's you know, a novel can contain so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that they are, you know, they're more the attributes of someone who has problems paying attention than they are to someone who has a articulable plan. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you get to the tone of Blum? You mentioned in another conversation that we had that you think about soap operas and Hollywood. Tell me, or television and Hollywood. A kind of...
Well, I was thinking a lot about TV with this book, right?
And
I mean, maybe because I was writing it during the pandemic or something, but I think that when you think about, you know, the Netanyahu family comes to the United States, and we can get into why they came to the United States maybe, you know, in a second. They came to the United States at really the time of the birth of television. And so I have this idea of, you know, what are the early television shows that are on? It's like all shows that are about the cops being good guys and solving crimes and, you know, shutting things down. And then the cowboys killing the Indians, which, you know, you have a very good metaphor for occupation possibly there. And these are, you know, the fundamental kind of American sitcoms. I was thinking to myself, you know, I had another friend, an older friend who, you know, was telling me who would always say to me, you know, the West Coast is Hollywood and the East Coast is TV. Okay. And I think, you know, I said, you know, what do you mean by that? And he says, you know, one of the very few authentically American art forms is the sitcom, right? And he says, you know, what is the sitcom? He says the sitcom is a bunch of different people, all from different parts of life, walks of life, living together in the same apartment building where there's no privacy, there are no locks on any of the doors, everyone is always barging in, everyone's always going through everyone's drawers, everyone's on top of each other, in each other's faces, in each other's business, sleeping with everyone else, and just constant pressure. He says, and that was the immigrant experience. That was living in tenements in New York at the turn of the century. And the children who grew up in the tenements wrote sitcoms. And that was very much in my mind as I was making this book. It was trying to kind of represent the Netanyahu family as this immigrant sitcom right on that edge between the two.
When
the other thing he said to me, is, he says, you know, one of the strangest things about Hollywood is that it's all founded by Jews in the garment business, Jews in the clothing business. He says, why? That's the weirdest thing in the world. Why is it founded by Jews in the clothing business? He says, well, two reasons. One, because in the clothing business, you're always thinking a season ahead. In summer, you're making the winter collection. In winter, you're making the summer collection. So you know about investing and only getting it back later. The second thing is, in the garment business, just like in Hollywood, it's all about cutting. He was a funny guy.
You can call that a Jewish story?
It was a story told by a Jew. I don't know.
When you think, or when you heard that category of Jewish novel, what do you think it is? Do you think you write Jewish novels? It's a subject matter?
The day they invent a section in the bookstore called Jewish novels, we're all fucked. So, I don't know.
So let's talk about Jewish humor. It's better?
I don't, yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Is that kind of thing? Is that does exist a kind of humor that is identified as a Jewish humor?
I think there was very much a Yiddish humor.
Yiddish?
I think there was a Yiddish humor, and I think that there was a strong half-millennium tradition of Yiddish humor that was born out of situational powerlessness in Eastern Europe, the Pale of Settlement, you know, and parts of the Russian Empire where Jews were allowed to settle, basically throughout Yiddish culture. I think it was an element of, you know, in Václav Havel's phrase, it was the power of the powerless. It was people who were incapable of changing their situation, so they could only, in some way, laugh at it. I think that that becomes complicated. First of all, it edges into nostalgia and kitsch when it is the humor of Jews who are in a more powerful position, and it doesn't fully translate into Hebrew, or the core of Israeli humor is Yiddish humor, and that's sort of an unavoidable and interesting political fact.
Mm-hmm. And you are mentioned this kind of subject, political. We are talking about Netanyahu's. We are talking about Israel, and it's impossible. I think that you don't agree with that, but not to talk about this moment.
I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Okay. Sure.
Is it possible to make humor about this moment?
Sure.
Can you explain?
Can I explain? I don't know. Do you want to hear the only good October 7th joke? It's a good way to start. Yeah, yeah.
They say yes?
I don't know. We'll see. You know, I can't sort of translate it in my head. Okay. You know, people are saying Hamas, Nazis. They're always comparing Hamas and Nazis. You know, okay. Say what you will about the Nazis, at least they never kidnapped Holocaust survivors. It's a good joke. You asked. I don't know if it's possible. The audience decides. The audience decides if it's possible. If the audience decides it's not possible, there's your answer.
When you write...
Look, I have to say, you know, the question, is it possible, is different from, is it appropriate?
Okay.
The different, if it's appropriate, is different from, is it acceptable? Mm-hmm. Then different from, is it acceptable, is acceptable to who? Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, in my family and in my circle of friends, you know, I've been to a number of funerals and memorial services where I would not make a joke, you know? Looking at the, you know, 40,000 Palestinians who have been killed by the Israeli response, by this war, I don't make that joke when I see a child losing limbs, right? When I'm at a protest in Tel Aviv on the street and they're spraying water cannons in people's eyes and a guy on a horse is trampling people, you don't make those jokes. But unless you can reserve for yourself the right to make them on your own terms, under your name, on a piece of paper, that's inarguable. Inarguable that, you know, that one can put down in writing something that anyone is free to reject. I think it's very different from kind of taking the stage at a moment and saying, here, my joke is more important than your pain.
Mm-hmm. I make the question from another point. It is possible, you tend to look to the world with irony.
Is there any other way to look at it?
So you answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
And when you are an observer as a writer, I guess all writers are observers of the world. When you look, what inspires you to write a story when we are? Let's take an example. In this moment, what would inspire you to write a novel with that look, irony?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I don't know that novelists exist in the moment, and of course, the moment always changes and becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. It's like, what's the novel about now? What's the novel about tomorrow? What's the novel about the next? You know, I don't know that novelists work on that time scheme. I was thinking a lot with this book about. I was thinking about, you know, this phrase, which I guess is, you know, I'm sure it's the phrase in Portuguese, is, you know, identity politics and what identity politics means. And I was thinking a lot about what is the history of identity politics. And I think if you speak to most people, I don't know, most people, I don't know what they would say, but if you speak to most people who would say that they have a history of identity politics, they would say that it really, in its modern incarnation, it begins the 1968 generation. You see this call for like minority representation in government, in media, in academia, and then you see that being further and further institutionalized into the 80s, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that's definitely left out of a history of identity politics is the fact that the earliest and most successful to date achievement of identity politics has been Zionism, which is something very difficult for left-wing proponents or supporters of identity politics to countenance. That if identity politics taken to its extreme results in Zionism, results in a state with a safe zone, a safe space for a minority to reside under its own autonomy with its own military and nuclear program. There it is, identity politics. And I was interested in this, as a novelist, in this contradiction, in this structural contradiction, that identity politics today is the identity politics that condemns the original expression of post-World War I identity politics in Zionism. Now, I find all extreme expressions of ideology to be somewhat discomfiting. I don't, you know, but truthfully, that dissonance enlivened me as a novelist, and I wanted to sort of understand whose identity politics are acceptable. At what point do identity politics become unacceptable? When does one person's identity politics deny another person's ability to perform identity politics? And are identity politics things that are only to be fought out under a pluralistic, multicultural, democratic umbrella, or do they actually, can they successfully result in nation states?
Mm-hmm. And a satire can born from that.
Yeah, from all that boring shit, you can make a satire, I hope. I hope.
And you told a joke here, and when you write your books are full of humor, of irony, as you already know. How do you test? How do you feel that what you are writing works as a art form, as literary form, with that irony?
I never know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the great experiment. I mean, that's the great risk. You know, you write something and you show it to people, and you hope that they'll still speak with you. I don't know.
Have you lost some friends?
Yes, but I've gained some friends, so yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the balance is...
The universe is in balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
This book touches important questions like revisionism.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about history. We talk about revisionism, and we talk also about some expectations about the families, Jewish families and fathers that want his children to be a pediatrician or a messiah.
Mm.
What do you think of this? You wrote somewhere that messianism is a discipline most important for Jewish history.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the difference in the Jewish tradition, I think, is that job opening for Jews is still open. Right? They're still interviewing people for that position.
For Messiah.
Yeah. And that, you know, it's still an ongoing concern. Yeah. It makes it exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and when the Messiah were found, when they find a Messiah, Jewish have to?
When? I don't, sure. I mean, if you think that Jews are going to agree on who it's going to be, then that's amazing. Sure. Right.
Ever think about the profile of a Messiah?
Ever think about all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share with us?
I think it's somewhere, when I have to picture a Messiah, it's somewhere between, like, I was just thinking, it's like half Donald Trump and half a very large chicken. Like I don't know.
And you follow?
If I'm just picturing what it looks like, I don't know.
Will you follow that Messiah?
a very large chicken, I'd be interested in kind of seeing where it goes, you know? Just to eat it, you know? Get it, eat it. I don't know. I feel like, yeah. I mean, my problem with the Christian Messiah is that he, in so many of the depictions of him, he's very good looking.
The Messiah.
Jesus is very good looking.
He is.
So I would hope to have an ugly Messiah. I wouldn't want someone so handsome. I could never follow someone so handsome.
Okay, let's
You asked me what they thought I looked like.
change the subject.
Okay.
Trump and the chicken, something like that.
Yeah.
You are a journalist also.
I was. Yeah, I'm in recovery from that.
But you write for newspapers or journalistic pieces?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
And now you are writing, I know that you don't want to tell what you are writing, but you are writing something about that came from a question, and that has to do.
I mean, I'm writing about the war right now, and I've been in Israel and the Gaza border for a little bit, and yeah, I can't really talk about what I'm.
Not the question.
Oh, people will read it. There's the internet; it'll come out. Yeah.
In Harper's.
Yeah, that'll be Harper's. Yeah.
In Harper's. September.
If I finish it, I spend all the time in Portugal. I have no time to finish it. You know.
So your writing in journalism,
Mm-hmm.
it's different from your writing in fiction.
Yeah.
And you in your essays, it's also different. You made an essay that I like a lot. It's called Attention, and it has to do with the relation between the human beings and the internet and the way that we are being subjected to that this kind of new technologies. What made you go to that direction?
I mean, I actually think that the essay is against everyone who said exactly that.
Okay.
Sorry. But it's just, the essay is against the people who are saying, oh, our attention spans are being destroyed by technologies and so on and so forth.
I didn't say that.
You didn't know, but you said it's about the encounter between humans and the internet and technologies. And I was trying to, the purpose of this essay is to ask, what is this thing, attention? Everyone takes for granted that there's this thing called attention that we have less of, right? But, if I have something and then I suddenly have less of it, I want to know what that is. Right? What am I losing? Mm-hmm. And this idea of attention was this idea that it was, I kind of came to this conclusion that, attention is whatever the person writing about attention or speaking about attention wants to call it, wants to define it as. Every author has their own definition for attention. And a lot of those definitions have to do with social control, with economic control, with the idea of don't look here, look there, right? Don't pay attention to this set of facts, pay attention to this set of facts. And so, the essay was really about how attention was this idea that's developed sort of along with the Industrial Revolution and the science called psychometrics of this idea of measuring people's ability to perceive. And it essentially, attention was this way of metricizing the human, of talking about the human as if they were a perception machine. And it created the idea that, it created a reality called attention that in order to create an artificial scarcity, to make people then afraid that this thing that they didn't even know that they had is suddenly dwindling or diminishing. And so I was very interested in this, in not the way that we were interfacing with technology, but the way that we were essentially being turned into technology or treated as technology ourselves.
And there are people that say, not me, that kind of attention despair is killing literature or the way we read books or literature. What do you think about this? Literature is a kind of, is condemned?
Condemned? I mean, yeah, but I don't know that it's because of, we had a good run. I mean, I think that in many ways it benefits literature. How about this? I think it was artificial for literature to be so in the center of mass culture as it was in the 20th century. And it definitely, and it benefits literature to live in somewhat neglect, because it seems to me that in neglect is freedom these days, and that the greatest freedom is actually to be found in neglect and in the margins. I think that the idea of literature being this kind of blockbuster, bestseller, authors in the center of the culture, authors on television, movies being based on books, TV being based on books, authors being that writers of conscience, you know, the people who spoke out against the Soviet Union by the day and by night got drunk and raped people, right? That figure of the writer. I'm glad in a way that is gone. I mean, I can say I'm glad I'm gone because I never had the experience I never had the opportunity to experience that. But at the same time, I feel that there is more freedom in neglect.
Because you are not
in a place where you're on the not being watched, not being listened to. You can say whatever you want.
So you don't have afraid to not be read or to be banned for something that you say or write.
Honestly, I sell so few books anyway that, like, I think my sales would just do slightly better if I was canceled, to be honest with you. And I don't know. I'm married. She's not going to leave me over that. My parents hate me for other reasons. I don't really see that my life could get demonstrably worse through that.
Okay.
It might get more exciting. I don't know. It's funny, you know. It's like there was recently this thing in New York of these, you know, or in America of like banning these people called Zionist authors, right?
Yes.
And people were like, how could they do this? How could they ban these? You know, and also, what is this definition of Zionist? You know, and then I look at the list and I'm like, the problem with these people is not that they're Zionists. The problem with these people is they're not writers. They're all like children's book authors and young adult authors, and then Stephen King. It was like half a writer. And so, you know, it's like, to me, it's.
So if you were
if I really wanted to get banned,
okay,
I would write a children's book about some trans Zionists aborting other trans Zionists. It's, you know, for children, and I'd publish it only in Texas. And that's how, and I get banned, you know, great.
So that's not that's not the case, I guess.
And I'd call it the human centipede. Yeah. And then I'd get sued. Yeah.
But not.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I have questions here, but I'm afraid to make you more questions.
No.
I don't know. I'm afraid to be cancelled. I don't know.
Okay. Right.
No. You are when you wrote this book, you sent the book for many publishers, and the book was rejected for many publishers. Do you have any reason or explanation for that?
You know, we have one of the only people who wanted to do the book in the audience. Marco Roth wanted to do the book, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. But then all of his evil coworkers stopped him. Yeah. Just one evil coworker, right? It only takes one. Yeah, it was tough to get the book published. It was very tough. It was yeah.
Okay. So I guess your translator has some questions to you. No? Is that one? Okay.
My curiosity was more about what possible reasoning from so many publishers, something like 24,
Yeah, it was something like 20-something, yeah.
led them to reject this book.
I think some people were afraid of lawsuits from the Netanyahu family. I think other people were thought it was too parochial, it was too Jewish. I thought other people thought, maybe some people just thought it was bad writing. You know, maybe people just looked at my sales track record of my other books and said, why are we going to lose money on this guy again? I don't know. I mean, most people, this is not a very promising pitch. It's like, here's a book. It's about Netanyahu, is a name that most Americans can't pronounce. And it's not even about the famous Netanyahu. It's about his dad. It's like, fine. It's about the 60s, but it has no, late 50s, 60s, but it has none of the sexy, interesting elements of the 50s, 60s. It's just, you know, yeah. It's not a promising pitch. Or maybe I just didn't do it well, I don't know.
Oops, I'm sorry.
No. Who is it? Take it.
I guess we have to pass to the audience because Joshua has to leave today to Tel Aviv. He lives between Tel Aviv and New York. How's that in between? Living in between Tel Aviv and New York?
Well, I'm in Tel Aviv between semesters. How is it living? Great.
Okay.
Great. I mean, you know, more people get killed in New York every day than in Tel Aviv in a month. It's just a fact. And I don't mean more people, I mean like according to the population, more people.
So I guess we have time for 2 or 3 questions, and then Joshua will be glad, I guess, to sign some books in 50 minutes, something like that. Question?
Sure. Hi, thank you. I'm halfway through. It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations. It's funny, it's deep, and it's so many things, actually. It's so many things. But to me, as a Jew from Canada, so much is about that place of the Jew in the West, assimilation, etc., its relationship to Israel and such. I'm wondering how the reception you feel has been from non-Jews who might look at it differently. And also, you say it's about Netanyahu, but it's also not about Netanyahu. Why? It was a great anecdote, and the scene with the kids is brilliant. But I guess there was a story before you heard that story. There was, before you heard the Netanyahu story, you had so much to say, and it's in it. Why was that the catalyst?
I mean, because so much of my life was kind of split between those two places. So much of my family is split between those two places. And, you know, frankly, I think a lot of it comes from shame or ignorance, frankly. You know, I grew up, again, in Atlantic City, New Jersey, very close to Philadelphia, where Netanyahu spent his high school career. And, you know, it was shame about never asking myself, why was the Netanyahu family in America in the first place? Right? I just accepted the fact that his English was American English, and, you know, and it's good to know that people still get phone calls in Portugal. It's like, no one calls anymore, and everyone says, like, you're so old, you're like, it's like a Gen X thing to call. You have to text, but it's nice that coming to Portugal is like coming to the early 2000s, where people still pick up the phone and call. Good. He had made himself, Benzion Netanyahu had made himself persona non grata in Mandate Palestine because of his involvement with the Jabotinsky Circle. He was excluded, like all of the other quote-unquote revisionist Zionists in the Jabotinsky Circle, who were denied positions in early government, exiled by the British, and so he was forced to make his career in America. So he regarded America as his exile, and he felt resentment and frustration being kind of pushed out into the cold in that way. And of course, he, you know, in my kind of cheap psychoanalysis of it, he passes on that sense to his children. And so a lot of it just comes from asking that question and from understanding that relationship.
And the chicken Messiah, would they drink milk or no?
Sure, but what comes first, the egg or the large egg or the large chicken?
One more.
I have a question about just process, I guess. In Attention, you have an essay about, I guess, tech books, and you account for all the time that it takes to read the books and how much you make per hour, basically, for reviewing them. And I was thinking more in terms of your fiction. I mean, it's beautiful to read at the end of the Netanyahu's sort of the genesis of the story, and to hear today that Bloom is sort of this inverse mirror of Bloom. But then in Moving Kings, like, you've got David King, you've got these IDF soldiers, you've got this Muslim man, Vietnam vet. And what's sort of your process to get to those characters and to some of those details? Like, a lot of it seems like very, very rich, like David King having secret water bottles full of vodka at some, resort. And, is it coming from research, people you know, yourself, interviews? Where's a lot of it coming from, I guess?
Oh, man, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you where the vodka bottles come from, I can do that. I mean, I actually think that a lot of the things that scenes that I end up kind of putting together all come from like a desire to kind of put one thing somewhere and then figure out how to build around it, maybe the vodka bottles are like an example of that. I think, one of the things that I thought about was like, when they put new security system around, like a new security cordon around the Al-Aqsa complex and around the Dome of the Rock and the Western Wall. And they put it, when they first kind of put up the new security kind of cordons and all the stuff you had to go through, I remember the first time, and I hate going there, but I had to go there because where a cousin of mine wanted to meet me, because of course this is what he wants to do, because this is where he goes 3 times a day. And when I go there, the first thought I have, and this is a week after this new kind of situation is set up, is, holy shit, they built an airport without planes. Right? Because it looks like an airport now. It's just like you have the things and the conveyor and the thing, and you go in, and there's even like a board that shows stuff. And then, so it's that image, and then I build a scene around it. And I think a lot of it is just kind of finding places to put those little scenes.
This is a question about sort of your role outside of your life as an author. When the Netanyahus was published, obviously there was no way that you could have known how the world would change, and could never have predicted, well, my opinion is a genocide, and could never have predicted that you, because of the book, would be seen almost as a voice of reason, or someone to be, to be consulted to discuss the issue.
Sure.
And I suppose what I'm asking is, to what degree do you feel a moral responsibility to be that person? And what has it been like to have been sort of drawn out of your daily life into a place where now you're speaking about something that has global significance to people on a very deep level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I was trying to figure this out because I was talking to a friend about it a little bit ago, where I was like, I finally know what an oil executive feels like. Like, you earn money as like the world burns, It's like, this is as close as I'll get to being an oil executive. It's like, the more people who die, we sell more copies. Yeah, it's fucked. There's no other word for it. Like, do I feel a moral responsibility? No, I feel a personal responsibility. Like, I take a lot of it personally. I think moral to me is a little abstract. And I also think moral aligns me a little too closely with public morality, right? And the idea that I represent a government or even a people, or could be made to represent this or that. I feel a personal responsibility. And that's maybe not even a personal responsibility to condemn, or a personal responsibility to even remind or do the stupid thing of presenting facts like that, like being turned into the high school teacher who's like, well, this is actually what happened then. I kind of feel a personal responsibility just to be the type of writer that I always admired. Sounds stupid, but it's this idea of a writer who, writers who faced actually difficult circumstances, not the difficult circumstances of uncomfortable conversations, who they continued to write while they talked. And I think that that's really the challenge. And I think that I would stop having any of these conversations the moment that I found myself not writing. Because there's so many writers who, when given that political platform, suddenly that becomes their life. And so if I'm talking, that's a good sign because it means that I'm writing. One person like that. Good. Yeah.
One more question, yeah.
Hi. Well, maybe just talk about anti-Semitism for a moment. I mean, that's,
Just for a moment.
Just for a moment, yeah. And I'm just wondering, is it too soon to be funny about anti-Semitism, given the broader global circumstances? Of course, there's a rich tradition of Jewish humor that engages with anti-Semitism. It continues today in different ways. But given how intensified anti-Semitism has become, and it's complicated, of course, conversation in relation to what we mean by Zionism, but where there's an intersection, let's say, between criticisms of the Israeli government and anti-Semitism or the rhetoric of anti-Semitism, is it too soon to have humor about current conditions of anti-Semitism, and what might that mean? And just a quick anecdote, my late father worked briefly at the Israeli embassy in the 80s, and Bibi was there. And I met him once, and my immediate impression was, he's definitely an asshole.
Yeah, no. I mean, if you stop being funny about anti-Semitism, then there's no Semitism to be anti, too. And look, again, this is where I think a lot of things, become muddied. I think that, a lot of the argument that we see is it anti-Semitism or is it anti-Zionism? And as if those are the two categories. First of all, as if they don't overlap sometimes, but the question is where they overlap and when they overlap. That's not even the question, because the third category is hardly ever in the conversation, which is the absolute necessity of regime change in Israel. So, what you're talking about on one hand is hatred of a people, and then you have this other idea of hatred of an underlying ideology of a state. And then the third thing is calling for a change in governance. And I analogize it often to the United States, which is, you can hate Americans, and many people do, maybe should, but, you can hate Americans, then you can hate democracy, or you can hate whatever political candidate you want to hate and want to overthrow it, What I think is really interesting is the question about the legitimacy of the Israeli government, which is a question that a lot of protesters are having, and the legitimacy of Zionism. It's not a realpolitik question, It's not a realpolitik question, not because it's not even a morally admissible question. It's because they're a country with a military and a nuclear program. Like, the entire existence of Israel is predicated on not needing the legitimacy of other countries, right? Not wanting to rely on the legitimacy of other countries. And so I do think a lot of that argument is, I'm saying it's not the conversation that should be had. The conversation that should be had, and the thing that should be out on the streets is, what is the future of Palestinian nationhood? What is the future of Palestinian governance? How can the Palestinian civil society be rebuilt? How can its governance be encouraged? How can it be done in a way different than the previous international campaigns that ended up fostering Hamas? How can Iranian interference in the region be countered? And how can the settlers be pushed back from the West Bank, from what they call Judea and Samaria, within the borders of 67 Israel? And these are horribly tough questions that people on streets aren't going to deal with. I mean, one of the greatest proofs that you can really see about the fundamental unseriousness on every side here is, Hamas has this opportunity in a hostage deal situation to make vast lists of the people that they want to be released from Israeli prisons, right? And there were talks of 2,000 people, 3,000 people in the hostage deals. Now, in all of those vast lists, you know who's not on Hamas's list? Barghouti, who would be the one person who, if he ran for the presidency of the Palestinian Authority, would win. A person who's in Israeli prison on terrorism, murder charges, who has, from the Palestinian view, complete integrity, right? He's not an Islamist. He's a Palestinian nationalist, a reformed socialist Palestinian nationalist. And of the thousands of people that Hamas wants released from prison, it's exactly him who is not on any list. I think that there's a fundamental unseriousness that ranges from, on the stupid end, campuses in the United States, straight up to Doha, where no one wants to look, and Jerusalem, where no one wants to look these issues in the eye.
So there is time for one more? No, I guess not. We have to finish for Joshua to sign some books. And thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Joshua, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.